What is up, guys? Rex here with a new video, and today I have a little bit of a different kind of video. I've never actually tried making something like this, but I thought some of you guys would actually care for like the planning phase of a clear. And what I mean by that is actually something we have done back in July. Back in July I did a stream and we tried to clear Abyss SL. And Abyss SL is notoriously hard actually, because we have like only Halora and she isn't the best damage dealer. Then again, arguably way easier than Shadow SL, which is horrible in it. Even though we have two Shadow Transcendence heroes, I would still prefer trying to clear Abyss SL, because it's still that much easier. Well, enough of that. I actually thought like we would do another stream, and in that stream I would actually try to clear the last remaining two stages that we have here. It's 30.3 and 30.4, and last time I think I did 29.3 still on stream, and then we stopped the stream and I couldn't stop myself and did 29.4 and 31 and 32 afterwards, and quickly came to realize that 30.3 was an entirely different story, and we were nowhere near actually clearing that, and it was quite horrible. Right now we can actually just try that. I mean, it has obviously no chance of succeeding, but we can still just go in here and see how it actually looks when we go in there. Since then we have improved on stats, we have improved on hero quality, and I actually think now it will be rather different, and we will have a way bigger chance of actually clearing that SL. So as you can see, our Halora did not instantly get murdered and did already do quite a bit of damage, even though she isn't even set up to fight this. She doesn't have proper artifacts, she doesn't have the proper strategy, our Ignis isn't homeowner, and all these stuff isn't done yet, and still it's looking decent. I tried that before, and there were some attempts where it was even better. I swapped the artifact, and those minutes were already like Half-Life, so I think it's pretty much possible right now to clear that. So I thought we will do another stream. I will do some event stuff, I guess, and we will of course clear those last two stages, and I think it will be the first ever Abyss SL clear, and I think it will be rather cool. So what I wanted to show you now is like basically the planning phase for this stream, and what considerations I make, and what I basically look at the heroes, and what the plan is, what the idea is. And starting off, we basically can have a look at the last SL29 Abyss boss fight. So that is basically the video of our last boss fight. We can stop it at any time. So first of all, that was the setup we chose. We still had a B tier Ignis that is now an A tier. We will have a look at these stats soon. Those are rather important. One thing that we will also have, and that I actually later upgraded and then regressed as well, those Ignis are very important. The V3 Ignis actually provides us with 130% of control immunity, and that is very relevant against the Abyss SL opponents, as they have CI offset, as we will later see in the skill set when we look at this. So having Suicide Ignis that provide control immunity is really important, and I want that for the Ignis that has to stay alive, the big Ignis that will be homeowner as well. So this Ignis has to be V3, so we have to upgrade it to E5. I actually have it already at 10 star. Till this stream I will progress that on to V3. Stellar wise, that's no problem at all. I would love to have that wall deck survive. I actually have a third home with like 60 to 70 stats. That would be cool, but I actually don't think he can make it very long, so I'm not sure I want to focus on that. It would be an additional source of strength. The buff from wall deck that actually recovers life from you is quite huge, and I've learned to like that in the last run we did. A better copy of Wall Deck would of course be beneficial to that, but those are rare and expensive, and I think we are actually at a point where we have a decent amount of power to clear this, so further investment in this is not actually necessary, though I think it would be quite cool to use him as a support. Beyond that, there will be quite soon the release of the next Abyss Transcendence Hero, and I was actually considering to wait for the next Abyss Transcendence Hero, but then I thought doing it with like one Transcendence Hero is actually kind of cool, and I don't think somebody has done it before, so that kind of nudged me into the direction of to say, yeah, we will do it with one Transcendence Hero, we'll do it with just SQH, and we'll later on, when people clear it with like two Transcendence Heroes and say it's easy, we can still say we did it with one Transcendence Hero, and it will be kind of a cool video. So, that being said, we can actually look at the fight and look at the strat I still had. I changed that around a bit for the for SL30. In SL30, I actually used the active skill of the Suicide Ignis as well. Upgraded them a bit, used Unbending Will, and used an active skill from those to actually gain damage reduce on my Suicide Ignis and on my SQH. And that actually helped quite a bit, because that gave us the time to hit down those puppets or those minions that would have otherwise killed us on SL30. One more thing that you should know regarding SLs in general. Back a few years already, I think, when Tix was released, actually, pretty close fight here by the way, when Tix was released, the game kind of had a problem with Tix nuking every single game mode. Tix nuked Tower 650 and then suddenly went into the Void, and Jesus cleared like the fire with it, which was absolutely huge back then, I remember that, and people were hyped to see it. And the reason Tix could do that was because he had attack swap and attack steal and amassed a huge amount of attack from the enemies, and the enemies back then had way higher attack than our normal heroes, so the scaling from the attacks that our heroes had was actually insane if you could steal attack from the enemies. So the way the H actually countered that was, they said, like in all new game modes, that's basically the case, they said, okay, heroes can't have really high attack. And they nudged that down a little bit, and now heroes kind of have similar attack to our own heroes, to our own stats. Still rather high, though, rather high-end attack, I would say. 8-9 million is usually common. And then they have insane holy damage stats, like 1000% or something. They're really insane holy damage stats, and this is basically the way they deal damage. The problem this possesses, of course, is that armor, which is kind of relevant defense there, has been devalued by that quite a lot. Armor would usually protect you against damage, but it can't protect you against holy damage, so that is kind of a problem. But that is the way those enemies deal damage. And one thing that we will use, that I can say right now, we have Divine Block Holy Armor on Ignis. We currently, Aika said that to me. She said that Holy Armor might be bugged, or that she's pretty sure it's actually bugged. We couldn't test that with my copy, sadly, so that is something that we might be aware of. If Holy Armor could actually block holy damage right now and it isn't bugged, that would be huge against those SL enemies and would surely guarantee our Ignis to survive. If it's not the case, we kind of have to look, but the higher stats of the A-tier copy will help anyway. We can have a look at the setup now that we had last time. That is basically this video I recorded right after the clear. Keep a look at the attack and HP stat, especially of the SQH, because we currently have a setup SQH. On the account I already prepared that, so we have 287 million HP while having 6 million attack. The SQH back then was set up to have attack, with a holy damage attack stone and an A and B, so pretty much an high-end attack setup, or pretty high attack setup. 71 on the tree with the sublimations for the active and the basic skills, so no sublimations for second and third passive. And of course, right now we will have all of this. No questions asked. This will actually be something that we will have. We will have full sublimations. And this will actually be quite cool. Some stats here. As I said later on, I actually used Unbending Will on the Ignis. I think that is a strat that we can use again. The Destroyer. I don't think we will use the Destroyer. I don't have one build, and I don't think it gives us too much, that much attack that it can actually matter. What is relevant though, and we should have a look at, are the stats for the SQH, the 287 million HP and the 6 million attack, and we can actually take a look into the game and see my current stats. So back in the game now, this is actually how my Halora is currently looking. She's at this point, she's maxed for HP. That is something you should consider. 571 million HP with 6 million attack, which is actually quite interesting because that is about the attack we had last time. Though this time we have a Demon Bell equipped, which means, do we have a, yeah, we have an A and B to swap to actually. And if we equip that, it's really about the same. Main difference, of course, being that we have way more HP, and if we change that build towards having more attack, we should have like a 30% more attack or something easily, which will make a huge difference. Beyond that, we now have the sublimations for passive 2 and passive 3. The last one I will mix later on, still need some sublimations for that, but we will get that till the stream. We can have a look at those sublimations. Tree level 100, of course. Ultimate Queenship, funny name. When a round ends for every one survived ally. Hard to read. No idea. Restore self 8% of max HP. So this skill, kind of a problem. We only have one ally that survives. So it's like pretty low restoration. She counts herself, it seems, with that skill. So it's like 2 to 16%. Still a decent bit of HP that gets restored. Some HP attack stat. Self HP restoration, and Queen's Guard, the Ignis gets healed for a little bit, not that important. And then we have this one, all damage dealt for the allies, which will be irrelevant because our ally is Ignis, doesn't deal any damage. Then we have this one, some more stats for Queen, definitely good, and Queen's Guard all damage reduction, which will actually be huge because our Ignis will get that, so 8% all damage reduction for Ignis, and the last one is quite nice as well. The counterattacks from Queen's Guard actually reduce the target's attack by 3%. So on the early rounds, especially when we still have a lot of surviving heroes, this will actually mean that the enemies will get a huge chunk of their attack reduced. So the early rounds won't be quite as deadly as before. And with some actors from the other queens that we will use, that should actually be quite nice. So already we have a huge chunk of stats here. We have a way higher tree level. We have better stats. We have better tenants. We have better copies. The copy right now has the same stats as the last one. Still block damage reduction giant killer, so pretty defensive copy. Not so much, still very defensively, the Ignis as well. If we look at that, Ignis is actually an A- Ignis. I quite like the stats. Not so much the crit damage, but we have Holy Armor and Divine Block. Holy Armor, strength of Holy Armor equals 100% armor strength. It takes effect on damage that cannot be reduced by armor. So like Holy Damage, for example, is a damage type that cannot be reduced by armor. So it would be reduced by Holy Armor. If that works, pretty huge damage reduce against the damage from SL enemies. And then we have Divine Block. The strength of Divine Block equals 100% of block strength. Its block damage reduction is effective against all types of damage. So it's basically an additional layer of block. So we have two pretty strong, insanely strong modifiers that will reduce the damage that our Ignis takes and should make it way easier for her to survive, which was one of the major issues we faced in the last fight. Making the Ignis survive is a lot harder than making SQH survive, so which is the case with all basic heroes nowadays, as the Transcendence heroes have just way more options to scale them defensively with block, armor, awakening imprints, and this is way easier to make them survive. Ignis has the upside of having really good passive stats. We have HP, damage reduction, and heal effect. The damage reduction 30% is just huge if you want a normal hero to survive, so that is already quite nice. Combine that with 55% block and our Divine Block and Holy Armor, and we should have pretty good survivability. So with that, we should have a look at the skills of the enemies once again, which is something I also like to do. And before I actually show you the stats, slight warning, if you watch that in the dark, it will now become quite bright. So if you have that on a smartphone in your dark, be prepared for that. That is an Excel chart that will actually be white background. I know how that can hurt, so 3, 2, 1, there it is. It even hurts my eyes. But that's a wonderful shot. It's definitely worth looking at, and it's actually made by GWO and Lowly. Those two wonderful individuals, GWO always with the nice data mines, and Lowly. If you were around stream from me, of me, then you know Lowly. He's in chat. He's giving the absolute valuable tips, and I think, like, if you look at the leaderboard, there are still quite a few people and quite a few achievements where we will see other usernames, but it's Lowly in the background clearing for those people. Is really a force to be reckoned with, and so is GWO. Those data mines are incredibly helpful, and I have definitely to give them those two a shout out right now. What it enables us to do is basically look at the stats beforehand in a way that the game won't allow us. This SL opponent is actually for all SLs, so you can look at Dark, Forest, whatever you care for as well, and I will definitely link that. I think I will make a pinned comment where you will find the link to this if you want to have a look at those skills yourself, but it can be helpful to actually have a look at this. The first thing, of course, is the class, Warrior Priest. Is mainly relevant for early SLs when you don't really have the protection guild tech. We now, of course, have damage reduction guild tech and everything. So as we have full guild tech, the class is no longer that relevant for us. What is more than relevant, though, is are the skills. As I talked of before, we have the passive 3, which is for all of those enemies an offset of 40% control immune, which is quite huge. Meaning, definitely, even with 100% control immunity, those guys could still be CC you, as 100% control immunity would only take effect as like having 60% control immunity against them. So CC is definitely an issue, but this issue gets quickly resolved by using our Suicide Ignis, as we talked to before. And those Suicide Ignis with 130% control immunity at V3 will give us basically... make the CC chance from them nearly non-existent. So we don't need to skill into any control immunity on SQH or something by using those Suicide Ignis, and that is absolutely huge and something that we will use so that we can disregard this passive entirely. Then we have passive 2, and passive 2 is also pretty easy to understand. It's the All Purify. When a round ends, removes one random debuff from self, so those guys actually have Purify. If they didn't have Purify, that would actually be quite easy. We would use some way of scaling their attack down and scale their attack down indefinitely, and then they would just lose. Now we can't really do that. We have to keep in mind that every single thing they do to them, every single attack reduce will eventually be purified. And we can, of course, get a great run, and even with the counter attack that SQH provides, at one point we could scale their attack down quite a bit, and maybe there would even be a way to use the Delasium, but I think we will go with the damage strat on this one, as making the Delasium survive would actually be quite hard, as the ways of actually inflicting attack reduces in this SL is not that easy. Beyond that, we have 3 types of enemies in that. We have the warrior, the big part, the upper one is the boss. Then the warrior minions and the priest minions, and all of those actually have different kinds of abilities. The main problem, of course, will be the boss. The boss is a real menace in this SL. in SL they tend to fuse heroes together, abilities from heroes. And this boss basically got an ability from Unimax, and Unimax has an ability called Rampage. And at the beginning of round 6 for self, gain Rampage effects. Skills or a basic attack is guaranteed to crit and won't be blocked. For 127 rounds apparently. I'm not sure if that is a typo or if that is true. No idea why. Somebody coded it. I think GWO didn't do a mistake here. I'm sure of that. Quite interesting. So basically what this does is it removes defense layers. Won't be blocked is of course an issue. Block is a big defense layer, so by being unable to block it, yeah, that's not very nice, and we have no idea if Divine Block works. Like, it's sometimes funny, people expect me to know that stuff. Guys, I'm a player, I have no idea how they coded that. If Rampage can remove Divine Block, we barely know how Divine Block works. There's just no good testing to that. So Rampage is definitely something we consider. If we could end that in the first 6 rounds, that would actually be preferable, but I doubt that. So I think last time against the boss we went with an A and B, so this might be something we will do again. In general, if I go for an SL clear, I start with Burst. Burst is just often the easiest way to clear something. If you can clear it with the melodic strings and burst the enemies down, they are much less of a threat. If you basically the best way to show that is a Mockman fight. If you have a Mockman and he bursts down 3 enemies and the rest are just some puny small enemies that can't really do a lot against you, then this is the best way to clear it. If you can't clear it with burst, you will most likely have to go for sustain. So we will start off with melodic strings and see if we can just clear the enemies that way. If that works, great, we will accept it. If that doesn't work, we will have to go with more sustain, and in that case it will most likely be an A and B that we are going to use. As you saw in the SL30 Abyss boss fight that we looked at, we actually reached round 12 in that, so A and B at that point is just the better choice compared to like a crown. At least on SQH, that is. Ignis doesn't have that much attack, so for her we will still use a crown. As self loses HP, all damage reduction increases. Kind of hard to notice, and we can't really do something against it, but it gets more tanky as he loses more HP. It deals 1200% of attack damage. The attack isn't really the problem. And then we have things that we have to consider. We have an attribute reduction for 5 rounds, so 20% of attack for 5 rounds. We are faster than him, so at worst that would be an 80% attack reduce. We can't take an 80% attack reduce, so we will have to go with attribute reduction purify. If that wouldn't be the case, we could actually use control purify and they wouldn't have to care about this last part, but as we need attribute reduction purify to get around that attribute reduction, we will need to use Suicide Ignis to keep the CC from us, and then we will run attribute reduction purify to counter that attack reduce. The 95% chance to taunt, even though taunt was a long time listed as a skill effect, it is a control effect and is also countered by the control immunity we will gain from the V3 Ignis. As I said, he has purify, so that is the same. And here we have a 30% chance to stun. Again, we have the Ignis that will take care of that, and here it's actually a little bit different. He steals 20% of attack and not reduces, so that is a major difference, meaning he will get our attack as well. And as I said, attack stealing is kind of a good thing for whoever does it. So he will actually gain a lot more damage dealt by stealing our attack, which is kind of a bit stupid. But if we look down here, we have actually the real stats of the enemies, and this boss only has 4 million attack, 50 billion life, but only 4 million attack with 974% holy damage. 4 million attack really isn't a whole lot. We will have like 7-8 million, something like that. So stealing 20% of our, let's say, 8 million attack will actually give him 1.6 million attack, which is quite huge to just jump from 4 million to 5.6 million attack instantly. So not that great for us, but nothing we can really do against it, as this is a buff for him. Like a hero like MFF in Forest SL could reduce that and could remove that buff, but we can't, as this is Abyss SL, so we kind of have to live with him gaining a ton of damage. So going for the Warrior, Warrior last two passives are the same, and each basic attack for all allies increases all damage for 2 rounds and crit for 2 rounds. Crit will actually be relevant for the boss after some time. The all damage dealt not so much, that will actually be hurt us. We don't really have a way to deal with single enemies quickly, as we basically hit all enemies with all our attacks. So not really something we can do against it. We can hope we can clear those warriors and priests rather early before they give the boss too many buffs, because having the warriors alive when the boss reaches Rampage and then having the all damage dealt buff on him, and yeah, that wouldn't be quite that great. So that is of course a problem. He does huge damage, that is something to consider. He hits only 4 enemies. Usually that would be something that we could maybe abuse by having like a crown team, but considering we have to use Suicide Ignis, the most we will have on the field after our Suicide Ignis die will be 4 enemies, so he will always hit all of our heroes, so not really something we can do against that. He has 50% chance to stun, again, job for our Suicide Ignis, and deals damage based on current HP. So high HP will get hit harder, but again, if we will focus on attack anyway, so that doesn't really matter. Then we have another attribute reduction from the basic skill from the warrior minion, which is an armor reduce. Also not that great. Armor, again, still a defense layer, even though the enemies deal a lot of holy damage, so armor gets bypassed most of the time anyway. This isn't really too mean if it stays on us. The attack reduce from the boss would be much worse. The warrior minions basically are a menace for their all damage dealt. That is something we should consider. Then we have the priests. Offsets control immune, purify again, and when taking damage for attacker, reduces 20% crit and 20% attack. So we have another attack reduce and a crit reduce as well. Crit, we kind of rely on crit to actually kill the enemy. SQH, if you don't know, has an abyssal corruption skill effect on her active skill, and what that basically does is lets the enemy deal less crit damage and lets us do more crit damage. So we really want those crits, which means that is actually a huge damage reduce for us if we crit less often. Then again, we can hope for a lucky run where we reduce the where we purify the attack attribute reduction and then just crit anyway, because this will actually be at max 20% crit reduction, because we attack, we get the crit reduction for 2 rounds. 1 round ends right after the enemy attacks, and then we have basically the next round where this crit reduction will still be active. So it's 20% less crit. It's annoying, yes, but with a little bit of luck we can just ignore it basically. Then we have the active skill backline enemies, hits backline enemies, so that is something to consider. Those hit 4 random enemies and the boss hits all enemies. This one hits backline enemies, 50% chance to stun and 2 times 1000% of attack damage. So again CC, which is a job for our Ignis, and then nothing really more here other than a buff. 10% all damage dealt or reduction. Doesn't say that. Interesting. And doesn't have a symbol in game, by the way. All damage dealt and all damage reduction, they didn't add a symbol for that, so no way of knowing. Nice. I would assume with the defensive nature of this ability, it's actually all damage reduction. It's also the way I saw it in game behave. Those priests, if you are on the 4 priest wave, are super tanky, so I would imagine it's all damage reduction. With the shield, so actually makes our enemies survive longer. All of them need to be killed. Those warriors buff the all allies, and those priests make all allies incredibly tanky, so they're also not very great. For enemy with the highest crit, this is actually quite interesting. Deals damage to them and reduces the crit. This will almost always hit our SQH, which isn't bad. Having an enemy hit our SQH is actually not really something we should worry about, because our SQH will likely survive. We get counterattacks from that. The crit reduction, as I said, we can purify or ignore that with some decent luck, and basically we will be quite alright with that, and should be no problem at all. We could actually shift that to another hero, of course, by having more crit on another hero. We could get more crit on, for example, an Ignis or something, with crit artifact or something like that, Punisher stuff. But I don't think it's worth it. It's not really worth it to take the damage from the priest. We can just let that hit SQH. She will be tanky enough anyway, so that's no problem. A final look at the stats. These stats, we are actually at 2390 speed, very relevant, 2430 for the priest, and 2454.3, interesting, for the boss. So if we are like at 2455 speed, we should have no problems. With an A and B, that is basically always the case. And we have tier 5, and I can just have a look for a second at our SQH stats. 1 second. Currently 2315, but we are using an HP stone. So if we switch that to an speed attack stone, it's already 2430, and then we can get another 30 speed, so 2460 already with an A and B and a speed stone. So we should be quite fine there. Should be no problem at all. So speed-wise we are fine, we know the abilities, we know we need the Suicide Ignis, we know we need Attribute Reduction Purify, and we know the speed that we need, which is 2455. So with all that information, we can go into team building, basically, and the team, I think we are basically going to use the team that I used last time with the enhancements that I said we will use a wall deck again, wall deck with the nice abilities. You can take a look at that later. Not going to use a destroyer, probably not. Maybe we can build him, I mean, or we just put a Delasium in there and see if he can survive for a little bit and maybe lengthen the attack reduction we get from the SQH counterattacks. That would actually help quite a lot. And then of course 2 V3 Suicide Ignis, maybe even V4, considering we want to use her active skill, their active skill. They will run Unbending Wool and the Demon Bell, and will actually use their active skill to get damage reduction on our homeowner Ignis, which will be in the max zone, and on our homeowner SQH, which will also be in the max zone. With that, I think we should switch back into the game. And that is basically what we currently have in Abyss. We still have the wall deck. It's the same wall deck we used last time. We will use that. E plus will be enough. We basically use him for a suicide ability. Even though his active skill is quite good as well, I don't think we can make him survive long enough, and we talked about that before. The Ignis has to be upgraded. This Ignis is already fine. We looked at that. We can have a small look at the abilities from the wall deck. Basically, this is the ability we are taking with for. When wall deck is dead, bleeds all enemies. Damage doesn't matter for 4 rounds. Can be purified, of course, which would be bad, but we have other ways to bleed the enemy, of course, with SQH bleeding them as well. So that's not really a problem. And we gets Blood Frenzy 3 for 3 rounds. And every time a hero with Blood Frenzy is attacked by a bled target, also by a target with the Bleed Status effect, increases self-attack by 12% for 3 rounds and restores self 16% of lost HP not stackable. These 16% of lost HP basically will feel like you're playing an Eloise. That's basically the feeling of that. The attack buff is actually quite cool, because we have 5 enemies in the boss stage, so we can get attacked 5 times. And every time we will get 12% more attack, so it's actually quite a huge attack buff, and it's for 3 rounds, which is quite nice as well. So the buff from the wall deck is quite nice. What you should consider though, it doesn't stack. So if we have 2 wall decks and both die, this will actually not be 2 times Blood Frenzy and double the buffs, but 1 times Blood Frenzy, and that will be it. So running one of those is actually quite enough. Yeah, and with that, basically, you've got an idea of what I'm planning for the clear. We will do a stream, I would imagine on Sunday, after I've done my attacks in Star Expedition. and we will see if I can clear it, and I hope I will see you there. I will of course be a post soon enough, and you will get all the information you need to actually be in the stream, to actually watch that happen, and we will see if that preparation and that planning actually helped. Check out the link with the spreadsheet from GWO and Lowly in the pinned comment, and I recommend using that to prepare for your SL clears, and it will help you quite a lot if you really are on the field where you do a clear for the first time and maybe don't even have the option to look at something, or just want to figure it out on your own. That's also a way to do it, and quite an interesting one at that. So with that, guys, I wish you a great week, and we will see us in the upcoming live stream. Bye!